Okay, let's get started, shall we? So, welcome everybody. My name is Arif Hamid, and I am a research fellow at Brown University and the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. It is my great pleasure today to host today's webinar, and I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Helena Ledmir. Helena is the Director of Development and Communications at INCF. It's a global organization that advances the reuse and reproducibility of brain research by coordinating the development of open, fair, and citable tools and resources for neuroscience. Helena has been at INCF since 2010 and manages the development initiatives and the communications strategies. Her experiences include working with science communications and administration at the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. And she's currently the vice chair of the Swedish Network for Research Communication and one of the moderators of Real Scientists, which is a science communication project on Twitter with over 85,000 followers. So I just want to tell everybody that we'll do a quick Q&A session at the end. So if you could please write your questions in the Q&A box below, that'll be wonderful. So without further ado, Helena, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. On behalf of INCF, we're extremely happy to be talking to Sona community today to introduce INCF and what we do and how all of you can get involved. So I have slides. I'm gonna share those right now. Let's see. There we go. So is that working good, Arif? You can see that good?
Yes, I can see your slides well.
Excellent. All right, so INCF, who we are and what we do. So very shortly, what we do is that we enable open and fair neuroscience. INCF actually stands for the International Neuroinformatics Coordinating Facility, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we try to keep it short and just say INCF. But some of you may not be familiar with the term neuroinformatics, so I thought I would just very briefly explain what we mean by neuroinformatics. So the field of informatics aims to enable integration of data across all levels and scales of neuroscience to help understand the brain and treat its diseases. And when I say all levels and scales, I mean all the way from the smallest bits, the gene expression, via molecular structures, cell morphology, to imaging and the whole brain. And the reason why we are interested in neuroinformatics and maybe not neuroscience on a whole is that neuroinformatics is needed to do neuroscience right. And people who are not familiar with the term neuroinformatics, they usually go, oh no, that's not what we do. We do neuroscience. Neuroinformatics is, computer stuff that we really don't get into. But the truth is that everybody is doing neuroinformatics. If you're not a neuroscientist and you can collect data, then you are doing neuroinformatics in some way. You might not be doing it well, which is why we're here to help you with that, but you are doing it. So with neuroinformatics then comes, data management. How do you collect your data? How do you store it? How do you tag it? What does your metadata situation look like? What are your computational models? What kind of analytical tools are you using? And what does your ontology look like? Are they standardized, perhaps? Perhaps not. So in order to do all of the things that neuroscientists wants to do with their data, want to share it, you want to search it, you want to analyze it, visualize it, model it, etc. All of these things that I've listed here on the right-hand side. In order to do that, it's much easier if neuroscience would be open and fair. And I don't know if most people are familiar with the concept of FAIR. FAIR is an acronym. that stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this is a set of community developed guidelines to ensure that data that you produce is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And the point of this is that it should be findable by machines and then support its reuse by individuals. And if they, not just data, but tools as well, software, things that you use in order to analyze or interpret your data. If these things are all fair, then open science becomes much more easy and data sharing becomes much more easy. A key thing in, let's see what my next slide is. Right, how do we make neuroscience open and fair? So what we do is that we make data and tools shareable by enabling interoperability and standardization. Because if, say, software is interoperable with another piece of software, then you can share data and look at the same data with different types of software. So this is where INCF comes into play. What INCF does is that we train and we engage neuroinformaticians, neuroscientist researchers who need to manage, share, and analyze their data or other people's data. Infrastructure providers and tool developers that are making or keeping the infrastructures and the tools and the pieces of software and even hardware that the neuroscientist wants to use. Also, we engage funders who are trying to implement and encourage open and fair neuroscience. And INCF does this by acting as a driver in aligning community efforts globally towards open and fair neuroscience. And we are working with the largest global initiatives like the US Brain Initiative, the European Human Brain Project, the Brain Minds Project in Japan, the Australian Brain Alliances, you name it, we have it. And we are also talking to the small grassroots efforts because that's really where INCF came from. INCF came from grassroots efforts, a small number of researchers around the globe that came together and said that neuroscience is not interoperable, it's not standardized, we are not sharing our data because we can't, and how can we fix that? And that's why INCF was funded some 15 years ago by now. INCF also educate researchers, software developers, infrastructure providers, and other community members on the benefits of data sharing and how to do the data sharing, how to move neuroscience towards being open and fair. One of our major activities is develop and identify standards and best practices. I'm going to be calling these SBPs that move the neuroscience related community towards being open and fair. We also advance the implementation of methods and requirements that move neuroscience contributions of data materials, method, tools, and code towards open and fair by publishers and funders. So I've been talking about data and tools a lot, and code is something that I haven't mentioned specifically, but that's naturally another thing that needs to be open and fair in order for neuroscientists to share their data successfully, and for the science delivered, like the scientific products that the research community as a whole produce, that this is accessible and reusable by others so that we can make the science happen faster and better. Because making data, making science, it's expensive and it takes a lot of time. So if we can do it quicker and better, why not, right? So like I mentioned, standards and best practices is what we like to do. So we're nowadays calling us a standards and best practices organization for neuroscience. So when I say we, who are we? who is this we that I'm talking about? So the green blob on this picture, this is the INCF Secretariat. That's where I work. That's not who INCF is. We're just sort of the facilitators of the facilitating organization. But we're situated in Stockholm, Sweden. INCF formally belongs to the neuroscience department of the Karolinska Institute because they are the one who won the bid about hosting the Secretariat many years ago. This is also where our founding father works, Professor Sten Gröner. But the true sort of the core community of the INCF, the people who do the actual work and who pushes neuroscience further and faster by making it open and fair, is our members. It's our network. The network consists of our member organizations. This is scientific institutions and institutes. It's projects. It's other nonprofit organizations. But it is also companies. We have recently involved industry in our organization. I'm going to mention that again later on. It is our collaborators that we work with in various circumstances, like the International Brain Research Organization, the Federation of European Neuroscience Societies, the Society for Neuroscience in the US, and now also SONA, which we're very happy about. We also have a number of special interest groups and working groups. The difference between a special interest group and a working group is that a special interest group is sort of a collection of people who are interested in the same thing. A working group has a very specific mission and deliverable, which is usually a standard or a best practice. And then we have the governing councils. This is not the most exciting of terms, but still I do want to tell you how INCF is governed, because your possible participation in our network is going to come into play here. So we have 6 governing councils at the moment. We have the governing board who deals with the strategy, the budget, and things like that. We have the most active one, which is the Council for Training, Science, and Infrastructure, where sort of all of the good stuff, scientifically at least, happen. This council is responsible for setting specific strategies for our activities in training, science, and infrastructure, as according by its name. This council has currently 3 subcommittees, which are even more specialized in the areas of training, infrastructures, and standards and best practices. The Standards and Best Practices Committee is also the committee that does the hands-on dealings with endorsing and vetting the standards and best practices that get submitted to us. The newest committee that we have is the Industry Advisory Committee. We have decided to start involving industry and INCF about a year ago, because when it comes to standardization and interoperability and things like that, it's really important to have the sellers of the instrumentation and the software on board as well, so that there is a continuous dialogue between the industry side and the academic side of things, so that the people who are making the instrumentation get the proper input they need from academics, so that the academics will want to buy their products. And similarly, the academic side needs to have that input in order to have access to tools and resources that they can use in their research. And why I'm telling you this is because if you decide to join INCF as a member, either as an individual member, or if your institution or project would like to become a member and support our activities, you will have the chance to sit on one or several of these committees and have a say in strategy and planning of activities, and which areas are identified as in need of standardization, for example, and many other decisions that we make continuously. So more about the network and what we actually do. So then our main activity is that we support the development and endorsement of open and fair community standards and best practices for neuroscience. We lead the development and provision of training and educational resources in neuroinformatics. I'm going to tell you more about this in a few minutes. We serve as an interface between the large international brain projects, like I also mentioned before. And we partner with a number of international stakeholders to promote and prioritize neuroinformatics at all of the levels. So this is sort of like a little pretty overview of all the things that we do that did not fit in the previous slide. I mean, I've covered most of these things. The biggest star around this sun that is INCF is the Open Neuroscience activity, around which we have different activities like the special interest groups, the standards and best practices endorsements, issues around data sharing and implementing the FAIR principles. There's also tools and resources here that has its own little subdivision where you can see a number of the different tools and resources that have been coming out of the INCF community in the past 15 years in areas of ontologies, neuroimaging, electrophysiology, modeling, atlasing, and various cross-disciplinary tools. I'm going to mention a number of these later on specifically. Training is then, like I said, the other big thing that we do. I'm going to talk more about that as well. Digital scholarship, I'm just going to mention briefly. We are working with publishers and journal around implementing standards and best practices, for example, but we also have INCF is managing something that we call the Neuroscience Peer Review Consortium, the NPRC. This consortium is by now fairly old. I think it's about 12 or 13 years old. And the purpose of this consortium is that the journals that have agreed to be part of it, they have also agreed to share reviews of manuscripts. So this is sort of the first instance of the cascading system that many publishers now have in-house. The beauty of the NPRC is that it's a cross-publisher consortium, so that we have, I think we have about 65 or 67 journals by now. Most of them are pure neuroscience journals, like we have Nature Neuroscience, and then sort of the impact factor drops behind that. But we also have a couple of cross-disciplinary journals, such as eLife and GigaScience, and a couple of others. So how that works is that if you submit a paper to a journal in the consortium, they send it out for a review, but they decide not to publish it. You as the author can ask that they forward those reviews to another journal in the consortium. And then that journal could decide that, okay, well, these reviews are good enough for us. You know, we can accept your paper. We don't need to review it any further, or they can maybe opt to take in one more review. But as a whole, the point of the consortium is that it will save time to publication from the author side, but also it saves time collectively on the, you know, global reviewer pool, which is nice. Right, we also have a collaboration with the F1000 channel. I don't know how many are familiar with them, but this is a publication platform that uses the post-publication peer review, which means that they publish your manuscripts on their website, and then they solicit reviews from people in their reviewer pool, and those reviews are also published openly on the website. So everything is very open and transparent. And if you join INCF, you get a discount on the APC if you want to publish there. So that's a good thing. So the last star here is the advocacy that we do. The advocacy is obviously for good data management and for neuroinformatics in general and standardization and things like that. But it's also, we advocate for global collaboration because, like I mentioned before, and like you all very well know, doing neuroscience is very expensive and it takes a long time. And it's usually faster and better and more fun and interesting if you can collaborate. So we do a lot of advocacy for this within various different areas. For example, we're part of the International Brain Initiative. We have a number of strategic partnerships with the organizations that I mentioned before, like IBRO and FENS and OHBM and OCNS and others. We do a lot of outreach. Well, we used to do a lot of outreach at exhibits. It's been a while since the last one, but hopefully maybe next year. We have a lot of presences in social media. We have a newsletter. We have various other platforms where you can interact with the community. I'm going to talk more about that later. We organize an annual neuroinformatics conference. We also collect representatives from the various large international brain initiatives every year, and something that we call the Brain Summit, where they get together and talk about issues around data sharing and interoperability issues between the projects. We also organize hackathons. We are a sponsor organization or mentor organization for Google Summer of Code and Google Summer of Docs, which is very popular, and other things. So we're very busy doing all of these things, and we hope that some of you at least will be willing to participate and help us out with doing all of these good things. So I'm going to go into a little bit more in details about a few of the things that we do, the most important ones, I guess. So when it comes to the standards and best practices, why do we need standards and best practices? Well, because if we have standardized data formats and filing systems and what else, then again, it's going to be easier to share data, easier to collaborate, and everything is going to be better, or at least that's our hope and belief. So we do three things with standards and best practices. We support the development of them. And this is what they do through our special interest groups and our working groups. And we provide support for working groups that are either developing new standards and best practices or extensions of existing standards, for example, to support other data types, maybe. For example, we have the first standard that we endorsed was something that's called BIDS. I don't know if you've heard of that, but this is a standardized way to organize your neuroimaging files. And there is now BIDS for EEG in the works as well. So we're keeping our eyes on that one. So once a standard has been brought to our attention or developed under the INCF umbrella, the authors of that standard or best practice can choose to submit it for endorsement. This is a process that we have, we've taken inspiration from other organizations' endorsement processes like the IEEE, for example, or ISO. We have some key requirements in order to endorse a standard or best practice. The first one is that it needs to adhere to the FAIR principles. It needs to either be able to prove that it already has community adoption, or there needs to be sort of a plan and very good reasons for why the community will adopt it and how. It needs to have a governance plan, because a lot of these things that get developed, they sometimes there's no real governance plan behind it, so it kind of gets lost and forgotten and not updated or kept properly. So this is something that we require as well. There also needs to be toolings that facilitate the use of the standard. The endorsement process has a number of steps. The one step that we feel is key is that we put it out on the F1000 publication platform that I mentioned earlier, for 60 days for completely open review by the community at large. Once those 60 days are over, the comments that have came in through that platform is considered by our Standards and Best Practice Committee, which then decides whether we will endorse the standard or not. And if we don't endorse it, we will send it back to the authors with the comments and some suggestions for improvements, and they can then choose to address those and resubmit it again or not. Once we have endorsed a standard or best practice, we promote the adoption of it through the INCF portal, where we have descriptions of appropriate use cases for the standard. There are links to tutorials and tools and test data sets and things like that. We host a lot of workshop and courses and demos, either at our own conference or at other conferences where we have exhibition booths. We assign RRIDs to everything, and we advertise it, of course, everywhere possible, both through like social media, conferences, online, various channels, but also through our collaborations with the organizations that I mentioned before. And now also, since we have this Industry Advisory Council in place, we are also, of course, facilitating the dialogue between SBP authors and industry to promote the implementation of standards, and also to journals, to the journals in our peer review consortium. There is an ongoing dialogue whether these journals would be willing and able to suggest using INCF endorsed standards for certain types of publications. So in support of the standards and best practices activities, there's no point in having a bunch of standards if people don't know how to use them. So we have built something that we call the INCF TrainingSpace, where we collect and curate training materials, not just in neuroinformatics, but also in other areas of neuroscience. There are courses, there are study tracks in all kinds of, subtopics that you can imagine. TrainingSpace is supported by KnowledgeSpace, which is actually a deliverable of the European Human Brain Project. We have been getting funding from there to develop this. KnowledgeSpace is a community encyclopedia which links neuroscience concepts to data, models, and to literature. Linked to TrainingSpace is also Neurostars, which is our Q&A forum online. The forum has almost 8,000 users by now. We have over 500 active users per week, and it is a great place to come and ask your questions about whatever it is, and there's always somebody around to answer. When Neurostars started, it was fairly heavily fMRI focused, but we have since then expanded quite extensively. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Neuromatch Academy. That was a 3-week online computational neuroscience course that happened this summer. But all of that community is on Neurostars, as well as the Organization for Computational Neuroscience. They also have their own section on Neurostars. So it's really hopping over there right now, which we're very happy about. But yeah, so TrainingSpace also then supports the implementation of the standards and best practices that we endorse, because this is where you come to learn how to implement these standards in your own research. Right, so here is just what KnowledgeSpace looks like. You go in here and you search it for whatever. It has access to anatomy, gene expression, models, morphology, physiology data. We have data from 15 different neuroscience repositories. The Allen Institute for Brain Science is one of them. Human Brain Project is another. So feel free to go there and play around with that. I will provide links later on. And this is what Neurostars look like. It's your standard Q&A forum with various subcategories. Very active community. Here's just some stats for the last month and for all time. And just like what are popular topics right now. So why should you join INCF? This is a very good question. So if you join INCF, you can join either as an individual or maybe you're part of a project or an institution that would want to join. But what membership in INCF does for you is that it allows you to participate in our special interest groups and working groups. Maybe you're working on some tool or some standard or something that you would like to have support to develop further. Maybe you need collaborators. Maybe you're in need of some expertise that you don't have in your current network. You can find those with us. Like I mentioned before, the Industry Advisory Council is a new and exciting, I'm going to say, resource for the academic side of things. Some of the immediate aims for the Industry Advisory Council is that they want to support the academic side of INCF with career advice, for example. They want to be a part of like shaping neuroscientists that may want to leave academia and go to industry after they graduate. They are very interested in participating in the standards discussions, and also they are interested in mentorship programs where they can support the academic side with, for example, commercialization of products that are coming out of academia. Membership in INCF also allows you to interface with the global large-scale brain initiatives that I mentioned before. You get to influence the strategy around standardization, around interoperability issues, around how to train neuroscientists and things like that. You get to have a say in what kind of themes we should have at our annual neuroinformatics conference that we're calling the INCF Assembly. And also you get to have sort of the normal membership benefits such as discounted events and priority access to certain things. So who then are these people that I keep talking about as our network? So this is our current members, the current institutional and the institutional and the industry members. So you can look at that while I grab a drink of water. So this might not look like a whole lot of members right now, but keep in mind that we just opened up to institutions and companies in, let's see, November of last year. So we haven't even been doing this for a year. And we have many more in the pipeline to become members for 2021. What I like to see in this picture is that we have a fairly wide geographical spread, but also a fairly even spread between academia and industry, which is really nice. So let's get down to the details about the memberships. So for the individual memberships, this is sort of your standard, any kind of society benefits, really. It comes with discounted registration fees for various things. The INCF conference, of course, like I mentioned before, you get a 20% discount on APC for submissions you make to the F1000 platform. You get a 1-year free premium account at Protocols.io. And for those of you who are not familiar with that service, this is an online repository for lab protocols, like how to do stuff in the lab, basically. It's a super useful resource to have if you are in the lab doing stuff on a daily basis. You have priority access to training events and other INCF activities. You get to nominate members and maybe be elected yourself to sit on our committees. You get a discounted tuition to the Force 11 Scholarly Communication Institute summer schools that runs every year. But the most exciting thing actually about the individual membership is that if you are a member of INCF, you are also a member of the Federation of European Neuroscience Societies, which means that you also get reduced registration rates for various of their meetings. You get free online access to the FENS journal, the European Journal of Neuroscience. You get the opportunity to apply for free abstract slots for SFN, and various other discounts for subscriptions of journals and things like that. So this is a really great benefit actually to get that extended FENS membership. And if you belong to an institution, project, or other nonprofit organization, you might want to consider joining as an institution and not just as an individual, because each level of the institutional membership comes with a number of individual memberships, as you can see on the bottom line in this little table. Together with various seats on boards and scientific committees and other things, you also get access to support for working groups. You get to participate in the standardization discussions and the facilitation of industry collaborations through the Industry Advisory Council. And if we ever get to meet each other in person again, you could also have the possibility to host the annual Neuroinformatics conference. Right, so that was it. If you want to get in touch with me, here's my email. Otherwise, you can find all of this information on our website.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Helena. That was actually a lot of information. But nonetheless, super useful. I'm still trying to contain myself. These are all super useful initiatives. So I thought maybe I can start with a question myself as we wait for the community to have their questions coming in the Q&A box. So I'm curious about the Industry Advisory Council that you guys are running, and I'm curious the extent to which you also try to negotiate whether or not these companies that make either software or hardware also try to standardize raw data that comes out of their equipment that academics and scientists end up using.
Right, so the Industry Advisory Council is brand new. They've actually only had one meeting. They were exceptionally hard to herd for that activity. But I mean, the thought is that they're going to participate very heavily in those discussions, because I mean, at the end of the day, they want to sell their product, and academics aren't going to buy their product if it doesn't match up with the standards that they need or want to use, right? So, and I mean, from the preliminary discussions we've had with them, they are extremely open to that. And I mean, several of them have joined INCF for the sole purpose of getting into those discussions, because they don't want to be left out, because they're going to be on the losing end if they are not part of it. But if they can get in early on and get a chance to adapt, then there's only gain for them to be had. So I mean, they are very positive. These, like, we haven't seen how those discussions will go yet, but the initial reactions are extremely positive, and they're eager to get started. So.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine that it will come to their benefit. I'm also curious the extent to which some of the data repositories that you guys have, whether they are process data themselves, or whether they're a little bit more raw.
Right. So one thing that INCF does not do is that we do not host any data. We don't own any data at all. We just pull it in from other sources. So it depends on the source very much. But there's more information, there's more detailed information about those specific data sources if you go to KnowledgeSpace and click around.
Okay. Okay, so I have one more question, still waiting for a few more of the community questions to come in.
They're like stunned by all of the information. They're just, oh my God, it's too much.
Another thing that also piqued my curiosity were the various training opportunities that INCF also runs. So I'm curious in terms of the subject matter and the content, because you guys cover such a wide breadth of, you know, the neuroinformatics field. I'm curious, like how you guys determine what subjects and the type of people that you rely on to lead these training sessions and the diversity of these subject matters. Could you mind saying a few words?
So if we talk about TrainingSpace, the online stuff, basically anything that meets our quality requirements and that are in the neuroscience space that we can get hold of, we put up there because we want it to be a comprehensive resource for not just for students, but also for educators, that they can come there and get maybe sample curricula or, you know, test data sample sets and things like that. But when it comes to sort of our in-person training events, those are normally held in conjunction with our annual conference. And they are submitted to us by the community members. We have sort of a few standard ones that usually want to hold something, like the virtual brain, or HBP education is wanting to do something. And I mean, we judge that on a case-by-case basis. But of course, we always look to see that it connects somehow to the main program of the conference so that it makes sense for people to attend both.
So it looks like we have one community question. Jen asks, is INCF expanding also to electrophysiological data and practices? It was mentioned briefly, but unfortunately I missed it.
The short answer is yes.
Okay, yeah, but I guess maybe to follow that up, so when we're talking about best data practices, could you say a little bit more, just taking the case of electrophysiology, for example, without necessarily getting into the details? What do you mean by best practices? Is it really the way spikes are curated and stored, or is it the relationship to be?
It could be that. It could be that. I mean, a best practice could be a lot of things, right? It could be the best way of measuring something, or the best way of, you know, which, I don't know, it could be a lab protocol, right? It could be a lot of things. And we are we're very generous in interpreting a best practice, because anything that can be helpful to somebody else and that can be standardized, sort of, we want to support that and promote that. Because again, you know, a standard or a best practice doesn't become that until a large amount of people use it. So, you know, we try to not keep too strict of a definition of things, because we feel that that sort of contradicts the purpose.
Yeah, I completely agree that having a very large buy-in from the community itself is part of.
I mean, that's why we're here. Like, we're a community organization. If we don't do what the community needs us to do, then there's no point in our existence, right? So we're really trying to listen to the community and, you know, be very aware of what it's saying and what it needs, so that we can meet those needs, because that's our sole purpose.
Yeah, completely agree. Okay, let's see if we have any more questions. Not yet. Yeah, so this was a really informative session, I really must say. I'm personally, for the type of work that I am myself involved in, I think the resources at INCF are right up my alley. Like I was saying to you just before we got started in the session. So this is wonderful.
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to things like TrainingSpace and Neurostars and things like that, we are going to go out with a survey in the next couple of weeks, probably, to get feedback on what TrainingSpace look like now and what it offers, and get some feedback on how we can improve it and what's missing and things like that. So I'm hoping that I can get that sent out to the SONA network when we are ready to do that.
Oh, by the way, I think in your slides you mentioned that you guys also run a forum or like a conference. Is this an annual gathering? And is it, if it is in person, where is it actually most of the time, people pre-COVID?
Right. Yeah. So we run an annual neuroinformatics conference that we call the Assembly. And the neuroinformatics conference is a part of the Assembly because the Assembly also includes training activities that usually come before. This is also the occasion where we organize meetings for the special interest groups and things like that. So it's like a 5-day span where we have the conference, we have the other events and such. This event rotates between where our member organizations are. So we are supposed to have it in April in Seattle in the US, but it is looking unlikely that we were actually going to be doing it in person. So we are probably looking at a virtual event, but we'll have to wait and see. I mean, everybody's in a holding pattern right now. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see on that. But normally it happens in person once a year in various places around the globe. We've been in Europe, Asia, Australia, North America. So.
Okay, wonderful. So I guess if we don't have any more, okay, we have a couple of questions that came in. So there's an anonymous attendee that asked, could you tell us a little bit more about the process of signing up as an institution? Will it also be an annual membership? And finally, the annual membership is set to start at a particular time, or are there no restrictions throughout the year in terms of when to sign on, basically?
Right. So the process of signing up is fairly easy. You go to incf.org/join, or you email me later and ask me again about the link. We are aiming for it to be annual memberships, yes, which is calendar year. Having said that, we are currently fairly flexible with that. So like if somebody wants to join now for half of 2020 or so, that's fine as well. Either way, we, like I said, we're flexible and we can have a discussion about the timing of membership. But once everything gets settled in the next year or so, we're aiming for full calendar year memberships because it's just easier that way since the membership comes with certain benefits regarding tenures on committees and benefits around the annual meeting, for example. So it just makes sense for that to be per calendar year. But again, let's have a discussion about that. Just email me if you have specific questions, or just go to the website and hit that join button, and then we can get in touch after that. So yeah.
Okay. So we have, actually, this is more of a comment than it is a question. It's suggesting that we are expecting INCF at the 2021 conference for the Society of Neuroscience in Africa, which is to be held in Accra, Ghana, April 25 through 28, 2021.
Yes, we're very excited to participate, and we're fine-tuning the contents of that session, but we'll have a training component to it, I'm fairly sure. Oh, I should say this also about individual memberships in INCF. If you join now, we're not going to charge you for this year. So if you join now, it will be free for the rest of the year, but then we will charge you for next year. Just an FYI that I forgot to mention.
Yeah, that sounds like a great deal. I also just wanted to follow up the previous comment with the SONA conference. I'm sure as your institution has thought about in terms of how the utilities of INCF will kind of meet the necessities or demands of different research and scientific communities across the world. I'm sure with neuroscientists in Africa, there will also be specific needs that some of the services that INCF will have that will be most useful, and some others that may not be reflected as INCF thought. So it'd be very interesting to have a dialogue at that conference in terms of determining what the specific needs for the African
absolutely.
community.
And maybe even before the conference. So we might modify that session to make sure that it's useful for everybody who's attending.
Exactly, yes, for sure. Okay, so if there aren't any more questions, I just want to say thank you so very much, Dr. Helena. This was a really awesome webinar, and I hope I'm sure everybody feels the same. Thank you very much again.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun, and I hope to talk to a lot of you again soon.
Okay.